good afternoon. Bill Gustin here, captain with Miami-Dade Fire. And we got our north of the border from Toronto, Canada, Brent Brooks.
Howdy, howdy.
Daryl Liggins from out on the West Coast. And the nice, warm, comfortable, balmy Las Vegas, Nevada, Clark Lamping. And the old retired man now, Chief Dan Shaw, who will not be retired for very long. I know that. And then what do we got in this guy? And then we got this guy impersonating an FDNY firefighter again. Talk about it. This guy, Jimmy Davis. The guy has got a respectable job. He's a captain on the Chicago Fire Department. But you talk about a friggin' wannabe. This guy is he's the guy. You know, he's the kind of guy that goes out and gets Marine Corps tattoos all over his arms to impress the ladies that he was in the Marine Corps when he wasn't even in the Boy Scouts. And then we've got Captain Mike and Dugan, Mike D. And Captain Mike, I'm going to ask you because I don't want to screw it up. And I know what a spiritual man you are. Would you please tell our audience what we were talking about, the saying or the phrase, it's a biblical phrase, before we went online? Mike.
Sure. There was a situation in the Bible where they were going to stone to death a woman for prostitution. And Jesus was there. And he said, let him without sin cast the first stone. And what it means is we're all guilty of something sometimes. Nobody's perfect. So unless you are perfect, don't criticize anybody else because we all make mistakes.
Well, Captain Mike, we're going to talk about mistakes. We're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the dreaded R word, rekindle. And sometimes I think we're too hard on ourselves. Sometimes I think we cause more damage. And sometimes I think we put our personnel in greater danger that is justified. In other words, there's worse things in the world than a rekindle. So I'd like to hear from you fellas. You could start with Brent, who had a difficult fire yesterday that would be rife for a rekindle, which I thought was very interesting, how he put his special use nozzles together. You want to tell us a little bit about that, Chief Brent?
Yeah, all these roof fires are very frustrating because you have there it is there. Yeah, it's frustrating because you do a lot of work, a lot of cutting, and it's a hot day, lifting up tar. Roofers caught this on fire, but that fire is deep seated, and we're going to continue to chase it, but not now. We're just going to put a hole. We have a 160-foot reach of coverage. We have a half-inch tip. You would not want to put your hand in front of it. It hurts, but we can see where that water is going to come out 160 feet potentially later, and in this case, it was only 10 feet later. And when we see that water come out, we know that joist space is dampened. It's wet. Let's move on. And that's how we can get ahead of the fire, by simply wetting. I'm not saying like drench it and drown it. I'm simply wet it, stop the spread, and then move to the next joist space. And then we can take that roof apart. Then we can start opening it up and dissecting and finding out where that fire was located. But stop it from running just simply by damping those joist spaces.
Is the nozzle you're referring to, is it the back-to-back, what FDNY would call their cockloft nozzle?
That's right. Yeah. We call it the opposing tip nozzle.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
So it takes all that nozzle reaction away. So it's fed with a 2.5. So if we wanted to, we could take off those half-inch tips. So we did get up there and there was heavy flame, or sometimes when we punch a hole, we can create a flow path. It has an entrance and an exit. So you can pop a hole, you get flames coming down, or you pop a hole, you get flames going away. So if it is heavy fire, those half-inch tips spin off, and then we have a 15/16 tip. So now we're actually flowing big water with 0 noise reaction, fed with the 2.5.
Looks
So
to
it's
me like you've got old-fashioned built-up roof, modified bitumen. You've got fiberboard insulation. Would I be correct?
yeah, and there was rigid spray foam in there as well, but
All right,
that's off camera.
and the fiberboard insulation, man, that is, we're talking about rekindles. Man, you got to be careful with that. So,
I like to think it
Daryl,
has these mosquito coils, and they just smolder forever and ever and ever and ever.
yeah, yeah.
So
Daryl,
Brent, oh, go ahead, Bill.
no, did you actually went back to work, right?
Me?
Yes.
No, I have not been back to work. I'm enjoying retirement very
Well,
much.
no, I don't mean that work. You got other work. I thought that. Why? That's not what I heard. I heard you're dancing with the Chippendales.
I'll go to the gym afterwards and see how that works out.
Okay.
I've got a lot of
Okay.
work to do. I don't know
Yeah.
if they can make me younger.
All right. What are your thoughts and experiences on rekindles? Like I say, don't be
Well-
criticizing our brothers and sisters until
Yeah,
you.
well, in the
been there.
city I worked in, we had one of the big issues was blown in insulation. You know, us that deal with blown in insulation know that it could just be very difficult, and it pretty much all has to be removed because some of those little embers float around in the attic, and it could be hours later that you know, blown in insulation, some that was, you know, in the past was just almost like ground up paper, could smolder for hours and then end up lighting off again. We also had some situations, and we're very diligent about this, you know, now is overhauling, removing large piles of debris out of the building that it's not piled up against the building. So make sure that when people are overhauling that when they're throwing things out of the window, that somebody is removing that so it's not up against the building and constantly wetting that pile down and stirring that pile up, because all of that material sometimes isn't thought of to be like the building that can rekindle, but once that rekindles, sometimes it's up against the building into the eaves and can cause some problems, or even that pile being on some vegetation or something outside the building. So
Before we
we
go
always
any
have to really carefully choose a spot. Yeah.
I want to thank our friends at Key Hose. That's keyhose.com. Combat Ready. That's what my department uses. Combat Sniper. The FDNY spec is badass. And they got a wide variety. They're all very high grade, and they're not cheap. You know right now, but I don't care what brand. The higher grade brands, you're going to have to pay. Go cheap on other things, but don't go cheap on hose. That's your lifeline. And
Absolutely.
you're going to need something with abrasion resistance, heat resistance, and kink resistance, especially long stretches where friction loss is eating up your pressures, and you're already operating with 50 psi nozzles. So, Daryl, you are so right. We have so many times we have taken big piles of smoldering crap and just moved them to the outside, and now we still got a big pile of smoldering crap. So yeah, I absolutely. And Clark, any thoughts, any experiences, any opinions?
Yeah, one of the most unique rekindles I ever had was one of these shredding trucks. The commercial shredding trucks has a grinder at the front of the truck right behind the cab. And we had one, the truck was completely loaded with ground paper. The shredding motor caught fire, started to burn, also burned the hydraulic lines up. So the truck was not able to dump. So we got in there, kind of located where we thought it was. So we cut the side of the truck open and we went in from the side towards where the motor was, located the burning motor and the burning paper, ground up paper in the immediate area, put a lot of water, put an enormous amount of water in that area, and then left. And unfortunately for us, the fire had already extended past that area undetected, and it was just traveling through little, almost like snakes, multiple fingers just cruising through all of that burned up ground paper that was packed so tightly in there. 30 minutes later, we were back at the shredding yard with a fully involved shredding truck at this point. So after that, we had to manually go in there and remove every single pound of ground paper off the back of that truck. It was an hour, several hour long operation. And we had one firefighter just on the ground with the hose. As we dumped it out with shovels, he had to wet all the material down and spread it out. So a gigantic, one of the biggest pain in the ass fires I've ever been on. But it, again, doesn't have to be a structure to have a rekindle. And not real proud of that. Got a lot of pictures of that too. As I was early as a captain, so guys made sure to take lots of pictures of me rekindling a truck, right?
Dan, Chief Dan, I know that you and I have discussed, we were discussing the topic for this month, and I know that you have some very strong feelings about things like the blown-in cellulose insulation, and you were a command officer for quite some time. Did you have any practices, policies, maybe just within your battalion or your district to reduce the rekindle or reduce the impact of rekindle? And if I could expand on that, are there ever any times where it's acceptable and expected that you're going to have a rekindle and you just know you're going to come back?
Yeah, I mean, all great points. Now, I go back to what Mike started off with, right? I mean, not in a biblical sense, but for anyone who's listening, whether you've been a nozzle firefighter, or you're the backup firefighter, you're the company officer, the command officer, you're going to be involved with one of these at some point. So, you might as well just do everything you can to ensure it doesn't occur to you, but you may not be able to overcome that. But I think, I mean, to me, it's somewhat of semantics, right? They're not rekindles because you never really put the fire out all the way. I mean, it's not like someone came and lit a new fire. It's the same fire. You just never put it out. Now it's just smoldering, festering, waiting for it to introduce some more oxygen. So we always had the mentality of, in Fairfax County, we got, I think, just shy of 500,000 residential housing units. So there's 500,000 opportunities for it because, to Clark's point, the majority of, what we see is blown-in insulation. And for our incident commanders, the evolution over the time of, one, maybe just to Clark's point, the peer pressure part, like, I don't feel like coming back here again. You're going to make sure, and that our command officers have evolved to the point of that's what they routinely will ask. The minute that fire gets into the attic, they'll ask the truck or the rescue company that might be up there, what type of insulation you have. And I think they're all sitting in the command vehicle like, please, God, no, not blown-in insulation. And of course, that's what they get delivered with because they know right off the bat, we're going to be here for a bit longer. This is going to be an arduous task. You got to do the PR thing, right? Because part of our mission in the fire service is to protect lives and property. So you're going to be doing a lot of salvage and overhaul protected because you're pulling everything out of that ceiling. You can't leave it to risk. And then you got to use the tools that you have available if you have them. I mean, between the thermal imagers and some patience, like you're going to be there for a prolonged amount of time, not just from the manpower hour of removing all this, but you almost got to kind of sit and wait to see, is this thing going to spark up again? Because we ventilated the structure. We think we extinguished the fire. To Dale's point, like you removed everything far away from the structure so it's not causing an outside to inside fire. But, the mentality always, whenever I left a fire ground, whether I was a deputy or the assistant chief, was just ensure we do not come back here. Whatever that means, or whatever means you have to put in place. And for most of us, we even do it with our acquired structure trainings because there's nothing worse than a PR when you're doing acquired structure training. Then you have to come back at 2 o'clock in the morning and the house is ripping. And the citizen's like, wow, you guys train 24 hours a day. Like, yeah, that's what we do. This is purely intentional. It's just not good for us when we want to look like professionals. So routinely what the incident commanders would do is not only use our special services and make sure they're wetting everything down, They would have some different strategies. They would use a 1% foam to be able to coat that entire upper floor attic space after we've ripped all that stuff out. They're removing all that. They're making rotations of companies that come through there and say every 2 hours I'm going to send, because for us 4 engines go to a box, to a house fire. Maybe I'm going to send those 3 engines on 2-hour increments just to drive by this house, go in, take the thermal imager, do a visual inspection, make sure we're not coming back here. Because it is, I mean, those little, smoldering parts are just floating around that attic, and all they need is nestle into another piece of that blown insulation, and you're going to be back there later. So I think it starts with, first with the mentality of these aren't rekindles. You never put the fire all the way out if you're coming back. It was just waiting for you to come back.
And then what would you tell the homeowner? Now, I know that differs with, it's a single family home. Let's say it's a single family home. And how do you explain to the homeowner in a way that shows that we're not intentionally trying to cause more damage, that this is a necessary evil, and that we fire officer and homeowner have a problem?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because we were fortunate in the response areas, right? Because we had 39 companies, right? So they can get there pretty quickly. So many times when we did, well, not only many times, we didn't have this happen often, but when we did occur, they get an immediate call. They would push out a 2-on-1 response to go check on the house, and they found something, they immediately take care of it. And most of the time, when you have fire in the attic space, it's rare because you have blown insulation, you're taking it all out. They're going to be able to reoccupy the home. So the homeowner's probably not in there. And that doesn't excuse the fact we're coming there. But for many times, it was really just, I don't envy the places that have a long response time to get back to a fire, because now that fire has an opportunity to grow and get bigger, which creates more of that public relations nightmare of explaining to the citizens that, hey, we're the professionals that showed up, and we liked it so much we came out twice.
Yeah. Jimmy, my dad's day on the Chicago Fire Department, his one of his biggest dreads was what he dreaded was the cold storage warehouse with the cork insulation. It's usually behind like a ceramic tile. And actually, I rode with the 27s in Los Angeles in 1987, I think. And sure enough, if they didn't have one, they had a fire in the same type of thing. That cork was smoldering behind the, it was either sheet metal or it might have been like a porcelain metal, but it wasn't exposed. That's the problem. It's not exposed. So, any experience with that, Jimmy?
Yeah, Cap, you're talking, man, did that remind me of Worcester with the line of duty desk here in that cold storage place. We burned down a couple of these cold storages, but experience wise, the only thing I can probably say that was close to that was Brock's Candy on Cicero. Same thing, deep-seated fire on their machinery, and of course they were vacant. Brock's is now out of there. You guys remember Brock's Candy, right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, that was mainstream in the candy world, but they left the building vacant. So we get there, the vagrants would cause fires in there, but we would have, they would have a room that was insulated again, windowless, of course, cork, layers of that stuff. I just remember that, that was a truck man's nightmare, man. You're going to have neck pain and shoulder pain from pulling so much. I remember that, but that was many, many times we had to go back there because people still saw that smoldering come out of the doors. OFI would call us back. It says, you know what, guys, you didn't get it all. Speaking of thing, I wanted to add one more thing on that. And I learned this a long time ago as an officer. Don't say rekindle on the radio unless you want everyone to call you up and say, hey, nice job, Jim, on your fire on your rekindle. Don't say that. Just say, hey, we're investigating. And I tell you what, this is where you're going to go. And we use the word rekindle. Here in Chicago this summer, man, we burnt down a lot of buildings. this summer. You picture the, the 100 by 100 and, 50 by 75, one story, type 3 constructed buildings. We burnt these things to the ground. And I just want to tell the listeners in that, you bet your bottom dollar, all right, that you're going to be going back there. All right, that still company's going to be going back there, all right, on this rekindle. But we also have to realize there are things on a defensive burn down, roof collapse, that you are going to get flare ups. We cannot get water to every square inch. To, I think what Chief Dan said too, you're not going to totally put this fire out. We've been experiencing with the Class A foam, doing the defensive ops and using Class A foam out of the tower ladders. I don't have any data on that, the effectiveness on deep-seated fires. I'd sure like to know, but we've done that, but they still send companies out there later on after the fire for some hot spots on that. Also, what I also found valuable for rekindles and single family or multi-dwelling fires is that OFI, the fire investigation unit team, puts the drone up. So the drone has really got a good eye in the sky, and it can actually see little hot spots, so that before companies leave, you can get up there, peel back, take a peek, and apply water to it. So even with the drones and the drone technology, that has come a long way for preventing, you coming back or any more spot fires that are out there. So maybe Class A foam might be something that we need to investigate, and also that coupling that with the drone technology, might decrease our incidence of returning again to the rekindles. They're going to happen. They're out there. It's nothing that you did. And remember, don't say that on the radio. Just say we're investigating.
Jimmy, you mentioned OFI, and I do that the Office of Fire Investigation.
Yeah, Cap, that's correct. They fly the drones out there. They 3D model the fire. So the drone serves purposes with the infrared, but also modeling from a three-dimensional scope, how the drone sees it, so they can recreate the physical aspects of the structure.
Jimmy, I can't tell you how many times the investigator has discovered pockets of smoldering structure or contents that if he or she hadn't been there digging, and sometimes it's after we even leave. If they bring in two investigators, they may have us leave, but then they'll call us back. Would you have Engine 2 respond back? We're going to need their help for something. Well, what they need their help is Engines 2 did completely put the fire out, so they saved us a lot of embarrassment.
Mm-hmm.
Captain Mike, I would be curious how you get, we were talking about smoldering crap that needs to be removed. Well, that's easier said than done on the 6th floor of a H-configured multiple dwelling. What are you doing? What is the FDNY doing to get that smoldering material out of the building? I know you're not using the elevator, because I don't even think the buildings have an elevator. That has to be a very labor-intensive operation.
Bill, it's always a labor-intensive operation. Firefighting, period. It's a labor-intensive operation. So this is part of the firefight. So there are a couple of things I want to talk about here real quick. First off, when I was a captain one time, we went to an H-type, just like you were talking about, 6-story H-type, and the guy said smoke, and it was the blown-in insulation. And we went in there and didn't see anything, didn't really smell anything. And the chief is like, okay, we'll give an 18 for a 33. One engine, one truck for an odor of smoke. And the guy says, wait a second, come here and look at this. And I said, hang on a second, chief. And I walk outside, and the guy is out there, and the vents in the cock loft on the outside of the building, standing on the fire escape, every once in a while, you will see it puff out smoke and then suck back in, puff out smoke. And I'm like, nope, chief, not an 18. Hold everybody, start a line to the top floor. We're going to have to open up some ceilings. So we started opening up some ceilings, and then the smoke started. Now, one of the most heads up maneuvers I saw, and I had never even thought about this, my chauffeur came to me and said, give me the thermal imaging camera, because the camera can't see through all that blown in insulation. He took the thermal imaging camera up onto the roof and looked down and said, from that doorway, about 10 to 12 feet in, down that hallway is where I have the hottest spot. Of course, there was an electrical fixture right in the ceiling. So we started there, pulled the whole thing down. It turned out to be a third alarm. Okay, the chief was ecstatic because he was going to give an 18, and we were going to be back for the same fire in probably a half an hour to 40 minutes. Turned out the flames were 40 feet above the roof. They cut the whole roof off the place. And then you got to get all of that crap out of there. And it was the blown in insulation, wet it all down, get it outside. So you have to figure out where you're going to put it and where the majority of it is going to go. The other thing is, if we're taking it out the windows, we are going to wet it down, have the hose line when it hits the ground from upstairs, wherever, wet everything down as it hits the ground, and then continue piling on until we could, because we don't move it around. The other thing that New York City does is if we have a fire deep seated that sits like this, we will leave what we call a watch line. It's one engine company, stays there. They're hooked up to a hydrant. They have a line stretched. They stay there, usually on 2-hour increments. They will bring another engine company in. They will switch out the hoses and bing, go. They'll disconnect. You connect to your outlets. When it gets all done, it gets brought back to the original company's hoses. But you leave a company there. They can stay there. Sometimes we have watch lines for 24 to 48 hours in front of this building. And it goes in a 2-hour increment watching what's going on for deep-seated fires. And it's just, it's just what we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave. So the thing is, and it's very, very difficult for smaller fire departments that don't have that many units, but not leaving is the key to not having a rekindle. Until you're 110% sure, not leaving out of there. But thinking about how you're going to do this, that blown-in insulation and using the thermal imaging camera from the roof was a game changer for me. I never even thought about doing that before. And I'm like, that's brilliant. I requisitioned another thermal imaging camera so I could give my outside team one to go up on a roof if we've got something like this. So it's a good thing to think about what you're going to do to make these changes for your department, for your people, and everything else.
Yep. And it takes some planning. We may have to bring in heavy equipment. Do you have an arrangement? Do you have some kind of arrangement with your solid waste department? Well, we happen to. We could bring in a big construction dumpster. Because the neighbors don't want that big pile of crap out in the front yard, and so they're happy to see it.
Mike, can I go back to one thing you just said and ask you a question? So when was he looking down at the roof from the ladder or up on the roof?
Up on the roof. He was on the roof, Dan, because the roof was so big. This building, the roof is probably, it was 19 apartments per floor. So huge hallways. So he was up at the roof. He came out the bulkhead, and it just happened that the apartment was right near the bulkhead. So he was able to figure out where it was and looking down at the roof to see the hot spot. And it wasn't that thick of a roof. It wasn't built up. But
So he's getting up because my concern would be like the sun is beating down that roof. So it's all going to look hot. But if that one spot is much hotter.
Much hotter. It's, and then he can pinpoint it. And they started, as soon as they cut the roof, they had fire out the hole because we're feeding it oxygen now. It's starving for oxygen. And then it was very weird too. The insulation that was used in this, and this was built in the 60s, the insulation, it was blown in insulation, but then right at the ceiling level was the brown paper insulation with aluminum foil on it. to reflect the heat back. I had only seen that once before in this, and that was in this building. So we pull it, and then it's just got that brown paper with the aluminum foil on it, and then it's all just blown in. And of course, you're supposed to protect the light fixtures and keep a certain distance. I think it's 6 or 8 inches away from the light
Yes.
fixtures.
Yes.
But nobody ever does that. You know, these companies aren't doing that. They're just blowing this stuff into the roof. So we ended up taking, a ton of the roof off.
Yeah.
A ton.
Well,
Yeah.
in the residential application, another, a similar technique that we see our guys use is the outside team would typically be the one using the thermal imager, and they would cut out the gable end vent, and they would just look across horizontally across that attic space and be able to narrow down and see where exactly the hot spot was, versus someone who's looking up from the second or third floor up in the attic, or trying to get up in the scuttle and look.
Right,
You
because
have a
very
greater
honestly,
perch looking at that gable end vent.
yeah, and the camera doesn't see through mass. So if you've got a lot of blown in insulation, especially if it's been there for a long time and it's compacted over the years, the camera's going to have very difficult time seeing through it.
Can we go back to cheap Brent? You had roofers working and they started the fire yesterday.
Yes, sir.
Were they using a tar kettle, or were they applying a modified bitumen with a torch?
Yeah, it's a propane torch, and they're rolling it out.
And as they go, and
Yeah.
did they? Because this happens in Miami all the time, but it's if you get there and you got a roofing fire, and you don't see a tar kettle. It is a torch, a torch, a torch all day long. It's a torch. I don't care what they tell you. It is a friggin' torch, for God's sake. Now, you're not going to see that torch, but it is a torch.
And you guys find when you wet that cellulose, it skins, it forms that hard crust on the surface, and then you can't penetrate it.
Brent, we did. We have some of our. I got to be careful how I say this. We can do things ostensibly for fire investigators and fire behavior dynamics that are less restrictive than if it was a controlled burn. Let's leave it at that. But Brent, we had a shipping container, and they furnished it, and the purpose was to look at the life cycle of of this arson fire. And Brent, you can soak the crap out of this stuff, and that's exactly what happens. It kind of forms like a crusty coating on the top that's almost like sheds the water, and yes, and then it shields the water from getting down into penetrating in the insulation. Yes. And
It's like it's trying to protect itself from being extinguished.
Yeah. And hey, I get it. Why is it being used? It's got a higher R value than the fiberglass. And let's say something nice about Key Hose, because they're our friends. And again, don't go cheap on hose. I say this every month. Take the Key challenge. Take the Key challenge that try to kink the hose. It's almost unkinkable. Okay, this is just me thinking out loud. You in Canada, especially, a few years ago, there was a movement that was against the logging industry. And they would actually drive nails into trees to injure saw operators. Am I correct on that?
Yeah. And chains, yeah.
Right. Okay. What happened to all that? We used to call those people tree huggers. Where did that all go? Because now We're looking at cross laminated timber and the growth of wood buildings. And
Yeah, they want
wood,
to stop. They want to stop using less concrete and less metal because they're saying it's more environmentally friendly for the planet. I don't know if cutting trees down is the solution, but that's the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. That's the big discussion right now is these timber frame construction. We do have a pile of them in Toronto. Now, none of them are over 9 stories. I know the U.S. is planning on building the largest one in the world. I think the largest one in the world now is in Germany, but that's the reality. Is you're going to have seven ply floor. You're going to have 3 ply walls, and yeah, stay tuned for that smoldering, slow moving fire. That's hard to get at.
And Captain Mike, maybe you can weigh in on this. Chicago has a lot of mill constructed building fires and huge fires. It's kind of sad how much industry had moved out of Chicago and they left all these buildings. In my vicarious experience doing research, I never remember a extra alarm conflagration in a mill constructed building in the city of Chicago that was occupied and operating. When you think about it, there's really no concealed spaces. Yes, the floors are soaked with machine oil, but again, there's no concealed spaces. Now, when you start to alter these things into residences, lofts, if you will, then we have a problem. But did any of you guys experienced a fire in a big old heavy timber mill constructed building of any significance when the building was occupied and operating?
I never have, Bill.
No.
I never have. I've seen it in vacant mill buildings, or
Yeah, of course.
where the politically correct way is people who are now domicilially challenged. They are living in these mill buildings, and I have seen fires where people have started fires. They start their own burn barrels to stay warm in these buildings.
Yeah.
And then they, heat the floor up, and that wood-soaked floor starts to smolder under the burn barrel, and then they go to whatever, do their get high, whatever they, and leave it. And then we have, it turns out to be a 4th or a 5th alarm. But I've never seen it happen in a building that was occupied and working in its intended capacity.
All right.
Same thing too, Cap. We have a lot of those, especially by the stockyards. The only fires that I've had in these, they were occupied. They convert these old mill buildings or heavy timber to like multi-dwellings, with the high ceilings. They're rather appealing for the newer generation.
Yeah.
We had some fires in there, but nothing of a total lost fire. And I'm going back in time, Cap. Do you remember the Ice Castles fire maybe 10 to 12 years ago on Ashland Avenue? It was
Yes.
a mill. They
Yeah.
were there for about 5 to 7 days, and that thing was still burned.
I
Remember
think
it
that
all?
was the one where the battalion actually called that one in.
Yeah, matter of fact, he was driving by. He says, "Man,
37th and Ashland.
that is it, the ice castles." And I remember seeing the aftermath of all the water. That happened in February. It was a below zero day, and well, later on in a couple days, that whole building turned to ice. But you know what? They were there a couple days, man. Again, what Captain Mike said too, the fire watch. They put companies there on a rotating basis because you had all kinds of flare-ups on that. That was a good point, though. They're still repurposing these buildings, but they're converting them in now to the residential. Nice buildings. I've been in them. They're really nice.
And Jimmy,
Now,
the other
are they installing ceilings, or are you still looking at the underside of the floor above?
Still looking at the original building.
All right.
The other
All
thing, though,
right.
Bill, that Jimmy was talking about is that fire in February in those big buildings with the ice and the buildup of ice and the weight. Okay. It is such an important thing. That's where these drones come into such, because there's so much weight that water is freezing, and now it's bringing and depending on the walls, it's going to take them out of their concentric, their mass. They're not going to be plumb. They're not going to, and the possibilities of brothers and sisters getting hurt by falling walls because of the ice or by falling ice is huge. And that's where we've got to be very, very careful.
Cap, good point. I believe Philadelphia many years ago lost a fire officer in an exposure building right next to a mill constructed building that suffered a collapse. It was, I think, a 90-degree outward collapse, fall right into the exposure building, killing him. I think it was only one line of duty death. But
I think you're right.
That one. Yeah.
Hey, Bill,
Yes, sir.
when you walk into a house under construction and you just see wall studs and bare floor and this house is being built, I would say that is very similar to what you would see if you went to go check out an apartment fire after the fire in the city of Oakland. To prevent rekindles, and I'm surprised how many departments don't carry out the debris, we do not shy away from pulling all the walls, ceilings, remove carpeting, shovel all the blown in insulation and sheetrock out of the house, especially in apartment buildings where it's going to be reoccupied by other people on other floors. It is pretty much left bare. When it is not taken, to that extent, is usually like hoarder conditions or something or there's just an unreasonable amount of debris to remove out of the building, where we'll sit crews on it and then use Class A foam. But we have talked a little bit about thermal imagers, but for people out there that heavily rely on it, remember that is, as Captain Mike said, it's only showing surface temperature. You have to remove all that sheetrock. And as you asked about explaining it to the owner, they're not going to paint over that. They're not going to vacuum up the carpet. Nothing in there is salvageable. And we're doing it to make sure that the building doesn't reignite. And I think that's the best way to go about it. The thermal imager, I think, is great to check for those hot spots, but we often even just, even use a bare hand as we're wetting down some wood or where wood is butted up against each other and feel if certain areas are hot. And then once it's completely out, and I think we mentioned this about investigations on another hangout, where use your flashlight and see if there's any wisps of smoke or any smoke in the beam of light.
Yeah, I think Jimmy brought that up.
If you see anything.
We had a fire like that, Daryl, where it was weird. They had renovated the place, but there was a channel for a pipe that wasn't supposed to be there. It wasn't normal. And the fire got in that channel and went from the fire apartment all the way across to an adjoining apartment. And we put the fire out in the fire apartment. And the woman next door said to the engine officer, and she said, my apartment smells. And he went over there and he's feeling it. Now, the chief said, okay, we're under control. We're taking up everybody. And the chief went back to the firehouse. And all of a sudden, the companies don't show up. And half an hour later, they're still not there. And then all of a sudden, 45 minutes later, they're still not there. The chief gets in the car and comes back to the job. And we're still back there. And we're opening up the ceiling in this other woman's apartment. And there's fire in there. There's fire in there. And the chief is like, holy crap. Well, that night, the chief, out of the, not because it was, he bought dinner for the entire crew. He says, you guys just saved my butt. Thank you. Dinner's on me. Here you go. But if somebody says something or you think it's weird or you see that little wisp of smoke, you can't leave. somebody's giving you a message. You can't leave, and you've got to check everything. You've got to check everywhere. I mean, it's just, again, all of this. If you see something that's unusual, why is it there? You know, we had another one that I had as a fireman, and we thought we put the fire out. Well, they redid the building, and there was a second pipe chase. The bathroom, they put a new pipe chase in. There was a second one behind it that we didn't see. And the fire was in that one. And we burnt the top floor off this place. And we think we're out there high-fiving each other. We did a great job. And we turn around and look up, and it's like, oh, my God. You know, the top floor is going, and we got to go back in there and do it all over again.
Daryl, you were talking about overhauling in a building that's going to be reoccupied. Man, that is an immense responsibility, and I can see, I absolutely can understand your reasoning. Is you're going to pick this thing cleaner than a chicken's neck? You're going to have to.
Well, Bill, I think there's something else to add on to that, to what Daryl, because he makes a great point that I think is overlooked, especially from the command perspective for the incident commanders. It's kind of twofold. I mean, one is, go back to what something Mike said, is if you're an incident commander and you have a fire that's in the attic space and it's been burning for some period of time, you better give it some consideration of putting someone standing on the roof that's being attacked by the fire with a thermal imager. And if you have the advent of the technology available for like the drones, they're invaluable. I mean, we introduced those probably 2 years ago, and I was at a commercial building fire. It was multiple flat roofs because it was split up between occupancies. And to have that drone fly over top with FLIR, looked at, we could see where the seat of the fire was, and we could see which way it was running because it was multiple built up roofs. So really it was a running roof fire that was just popping out in different places. But we had a concern about collapse because it was an older structure. It was only a story and a half. So this allowed us the ability to say, okay, we're going to focus our firefighting effort because we can see it from the top. We can see where it's traveling. We're not putting people inside the structure because we're past that point because this thing's been burning for so long. So really think about the introduction of technologies, even if you're not the initial incident commander, because you have so much stress on you. But if you're another chief officer showing up or you're someone else showing up, you're there to support the incident commander. So to give them some other alternatives to be able to provide those solutions is invaluable. And I think the other part is, and this is something I think our people became really good at, was the minute you heard blown-in insulation, it meant kind of two things. One is we're going to take everything out. And two, you're going to probably be there for a while because the fire investigators need some of the structure still there so they can conduct their investigation. So they're going to probably tell you, hold off, keep the fire in check, but let us go do some measure investigation. But it's often overlooked because we have such a messiah complex in the fire department. We show up to solve people's problems. And routinely, we forget, like, this house fire is not going to be the same as the next one. Well, if we want a blown insulation structure fire and it's 105 degrees like it was a couple of weeks ago, you're going to go through multiple alarms, or you're going to have to recycle some of those people to make sure, because they're going to be doing such an arduous task. And it's not the mentality of like it's a multiple alarm fire because we have fire blown out of 7 different windows and 5 different floors. It may not be that big of a fire, but you're going to go through a lot of people. And as an incident commander, you got to be mindful of that. You're not wearing your people down, because that might be a fire at 8 o'clock in the morning. They still got 22 hours to go in the shift. And so you're making sure we have a good surplus of people to be able to take care of the fire and get past the ego of, like, you might have a 2-alarm fire in a simple residential structure solely for the manpower aspect to make sure you're not crushing your people.
And the fatigue firefighter is not going to be as meticulous. Now, Daryl, you said something that we tend to forget. There is still a place, although, oh yeah, you could get burned, you could get cut. There's a certain place where there's no substitute for a bare hand. And actually, my dad taught me this. If you got good old-fashioned either plaster on wood lath, plaster on wire lath, and you can keep your back of your hand on it for a few seconds, chances are there's nothing in there. And that's no guarantee. That's no guarantee. But and there's no other penetration. But Daryl, there are just times where you just got what you said, man. You just got to reach in there and feel for something hot. And I know I've done it with cellulose insulation. We've all been captains, or we're captains now. And Mike, you mentioned a number of times about how you bailed out the chief. And I think that I'm talking to every captain out there, okay, that's watching this right now. I hope that you take your responsibility extremely seriously. That chief is depending upon you to be his or her eyes and ears. And he needs us, or she needs us. And one of my fears of the rekindle was, I know the chief is he's not going to say anything. Because he's going to know that there's nothing that he could say that's going to make me feel more humiliated and disappointed. And I think all of us, I think I can speak for all of us as captains. Jimmy, you and I were talking this morning. You're in the 17th Battalion, correct?
Yeah, Cap. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
17. Yeah, 17.
Man, when you're working for a really good chief, he demands, or she demands, the highest degree of loyalty from the captain, which is typically the highest ranking fire officer that's operating inside the building. And I take that responsibility, and captains or aspiring captains take that responsibility very, very seriously. And if you're getting a new position, go see the boss and find out what his or her expectation is, so there are no surprises. But again, my fear of failure, making a mistake, was not out of discipline. It's out of disappointing somebody, my boss, who's counting on me. And most of the bosses that I work for are men that I admire. So it's for those of you that are going to be officers, and I bring this up in our officer development class, especially for the captains. Okay, what's the difference between a lieutenant and a captain? They're basically doing the same thing. They're company officers. No, there is a difference. And I'm just talking the fireground now, not in the firehouse. Plenty of difference there. But you are that chief's eyes and ears, and the last thing you want to do is disappoint him or her. They're dependent on you. And it is a responsibility that I took very, very seriously. And I would expect anybody out there that is aspiring to be a captain or is a captain now, you better take that responsibility because it is serious business. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think it's very important, Bill. And as you said, it's true. It's the captains, but it's also any officer. You're responsible to that chief. That you are his eyes or ears. You are that person. That officer is the eyes and ears of the incident commander. And you have to take that to heart. It's so important. Whether, whoever that chief is, even if you don't like that chief, you still owe them, we respect the rank. Okay, you still have to do the right thing by that person. It is so important.
I think one thing that is very helpful, and I was never a battalion chief, but it isn't the easiest thing to do, just to make this decision that's going to keep everybody up all night and say we're going to have a fire watch. We call it a fire watch, and come up with a schedule of rigs that, 1 or 2 hours at a time are going to be sitting at this, this house or apartment. So you're asking a lot of crews to do something, they're going to be losing sleep. It is the way it is. Everybody accepts it, but they have to make that decision. And a lot of times it's the officers that just need to go out to the chief and say, hey, I think we really need to sit on this tonight, because there's too much. And that just reinforces and makes their decision a little easier, that, okay, we're all kind of feeling the same way, instead of them feeling like they're making some decision everybody else is disagreeing with.
Mark Hall, we just had a comment from, I think, Ariel Anderson.
Ariel
Yes.
Jackson.
Ariel Jackson. Well, Brother Jackson, Tom Brennan said it best. If you question a hot spot, use your hand. Wait a few minutes. If it's still hot, regardless, then open it up. I can't, regardless of what the tick says. So, yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And a very good rule of thumb. Yes, Mike.
Hey, Bill, just one thing to add to what you just said, or what this guy just saying about with the chief, is I think the important part to remember, especially for incident commanders who get promoted to chief, is no measure of bugles or shiny your badge makes you smarter. It just makes you more responsible. I think if you have worth any of your weight as a chief officer, you have such a reliance on your company officers and small unit leaders to really report back to you to what the true conditions are, and not tell you what they think they want you to hear, but tell you actually what is happening. That's where I go back to, is like, ego gets in a lot of people's way when it comes to actually mitigating emergencies correctly, because they don't want to go back for rekindle, or they don't want to have a multiple alarm fire in a single family dwelling because it's embarrassing. But that's your ego. I'm going to look to a captain to come back to me and say, we're going to be here for a while, Chief. Okay, not a problem, man. I'll take care of it. Whatever you need.
And the one other thing that I think goes with all of this, especially with Daryl's point to the watch line and everything else, if you are the officer on that rig and you sit in the cab and nap for the hour and don't get out and walk around with your flashlight to look for that wisp of smoke or whatever else you see, if you just sit there in the rig and do nothing, you're just a well-dressed bystander. You should be out. Okay, we're going to be here for an hour or 2 hours. We're going to have a drill. We'll talk about the job. We'll go out there, but we're going to walk around. We're going to do the 360 around it and see if we see anything burning, because that's what our job is, to stop this from happening again.
And Dan, Chief Dan, something I bring up in my company officer class, and we're getting some questions down here. Every one of us here are very passionate, and I would say very experienced recruit and officer training instructors. And we love it. And it's at this point in our career, especially me, this is what I'm giving back. Okay. But how can I best, as a rookie just getting hired? I want you to take a look in fire engineering, and you will see my email address, and contact me, and I will get right back with you, because that's what I love to do. Chief Dan, what I bring up in officer development is, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I'm not sure. Don't try to exude capability, leadership, whatever you want to call it, confidence, when you're not confident. You don't know. You don't want to know where the fire is. I mean, it gets down to simple, when your driver engineer is saying where you want to spot the rig. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't be afraid.
Well, I mean, Yeah, the sign of a good leader, right? Is that you don't know all the answers, but you know people where you can find the answers. And if you have a good catalog of people you can rely upon, I put more solace in that when you had the ability to say, I have no idea, but I'll figure it out.
Why do you think I hang out with you guys? I'm a blithering idiot. But my old man used to say, don't hang around with idiots. Hang around with people that are at least as smart as you and
make you better.
smarter. And we all bring each other up.
Yeah.
Bill, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah. 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 Let me see where we're at here. Oh, well, I have to go back to work, so we're going to cut this off. But I got to tell you guys, this is one of the best talks we've had. One of the things that brings me great joy in my career is, of course, recruit training, officer training, but also our monthly hangouts with experienced, sharp guys. I'm going to extend the invitation again to our brother Joe Barry. He didn't make it today. And let's see, Jason Hovelman is Jason. My son sent your daughter a letter of encouragement because my son is a graduate of Florida State University. Sam, you never know where he is right now. And on a serious note, Sam, I was in the hospital and I should have responded earlier. You lost it seems like a young man from a medical emergency. Would I be correct in that, fellas? In Wichita, Kansas, and our condolences. And I'm sorry it's belated, but I think we covered a lot of material. And you guys take a look. You can get our email addresses, and we love talking about this stuff. And I love passing on what I've learned because I'm not going in fighting the dragon anymore. So what am I doing now? What I'm doing as an advisory board member for fire engineering is looking for authors. And it's tough because young guys and girls are studying for promotional exams and they're raising families. And it doesn't give them a lot of time, but that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for up and coming rising stars. And there's plenty of them out there. There's plenty of them out there. And I truly believe the future of the fire service is in really good hands in the future. All right, till next month. Stay safe, stay healthy. God bless.